Ms. Cole, is there any proof you ever served in the military? My brother's lawyer dragged out the word any like it was a joke, like I was a joke. But it wasn't his question that everyone remembered. It was my brother's voice. Luke leaned into the microphone on the witness stand, that same smug half smile he used at family dinners plastered on his face. She never served, Your Honor, he said, shaking his head with fake sadness. My sister has no discharge papers, no benefits, nothing. She lied to our dying father to steal his estate. He knew exactly what he was doing. He said, lied like it tasted sweet. He said, stole like he was already celebrating. I sat at the defendant's table, hands folded, eyes fixed on a crack in the polished wood floor. The courtroom lights hummed softly above us. I could smell old paper, cheap cologne, and the faint lemon of the cleaner they used on the benches. I didn't look at him. I didn't look at my mother either, sitting right behind him, clutching her pearls like a prop. I just listened. My sister has fantasy, Luke added, milking the silence. She filed some government paperwork for a year or two. Now she tells people she saw combat. It's stolen valor, plain and simple. The words settled over the room like dust. Stolen valor. I felt the old familiar burn in my chest, the one I used to swallow down with cheap coffee at 3 a.m. in a desert I couldn't talk about. My lawyer, Mason, didn't object. He didn't lean over and whisper comfort. He just waited, calm, hands laced loosely on the table. When Luke finally finished his performance, the judge turned to Mason. Counsel, he asked, bored. Mason rose slowly. Yes, Your Honor, he said. With the court's permission, I have a document to be reviewed in camera. He held up a single thick envelope, sealed in dark red wax. No logo, no label, just weight. The bailiff carried it to the judge. The courtroom felt suddenly too small. The air got heavy. Even Luke's confident grin flickered for a second. The judge slit the wax with his thumb, pulled out one page, and started reading. I watched the color drain from his face. His eyes jumped from the paper to the two armed marshals standing by the rear door. His voice, when it came, wasn't bored anymore. It was sharp, urgent. Officers, he said, seal this courtroom immediately. The heavy doors slammed shut behind us with a deep, final echo. Locks turned. My mother gasped. Luke's smirk vanished. That single word, seal, ended the life my brother thought he controlled. And if you want to know why a single sheet of paper could make a federal judge go pale, we have to go back to the day we buried my father. Because that's when this war really started. My name is Hannah Cole. I'm 34 years old. On paper, I'm a logistics coordinator for a mid-sized shipping company in Virginia. That's the version my family prefers, the one that makes them comfortable, the one that keeps everything neat and dull and small. The truth is, my life has never been neat. I grew up in a small North Carolina town where everyone knew my father as Tom from the shop and my brother Luke as the golden boy. I was just Hannah, the quiet one who liked her books too much. My father was a mechanic and a Vietnam vet. He walked with a slight limp and never talked much about the past. But when a military funeral procession passed our house, he always stepped outside. He'd stand on the porch, hat in hand, eyes on the flag. And I watched that. I never forgot it. By the time I was 19, I couldn't breathe in that town anymore. The gossip, the small talk, the constant comparison to Luke, it pressed on my chest like a weight. Luke had charm and timing, star football player, scholarship, perfect smile for every camera. I had straight as and a habit of asking too many questions. So while he shook hands at award ceremony, I signed enlistment paper. Are you sure about this? My father asked me that night, his voice low in the dark kitchen. The fridge hummed, the porch light flickered outside. I am, I said. I want to do something that matters. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once and put his hand over mine. His palm was rough and warm. Then do it all the way, he said. And don't expect anyone to clap for you. He was right. What I did over the next decade never made it onto Facebook. There were no parades, no public medals. My work lived in sealed files and blacked out lines. When I came home for short visits, my mother would say things like, "So, how's your office job, honey?" Loud enough for Luke's friends to. "It's fine," I'd say. I didn't correct her. I wasn't allowed to. Then, a year ago, my father's heart finally gave out while he was under a car at the shop. The wrench was still in his hand when they found him. The town turned out for his funeral. The church was filled with the smell of lilies and engine oil, soaked into old work jacket. Luke stood by the casket, taking condolences like congratulations. I stood alone in the second pew, fingers pressed together so tightly my knuckles went white. That's where this story really begins, with a single line in my father's will, one sentence that cracked my brother's perfect world and dragged my secret one into the light. Our family house sat on the edge of town, a low brick place with peeling white shutters and a porch that sagged just enough to creak when you crossed. I can still see the light in the kitchen window at night, yellow and soft, pooling over old linoleum chipped cabinet. I can still hear the sound of football games from the living room, Luke's name shouted from the TV, my mother clapping like she'd trained for it. My father's world was smaller, quieter. His kingdom was the garage out back, half attached to the house, always smelling like grease and coffee. Tools lined the walls in perfect, almost military order. An old radio sat on the shelf, forever stuck between two stations. When I was a kid, I'd sit on the workbench while he checked my bike or fixed a neighbor's alternate. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was never small talk. Engines don't lie, he'd say, running a rag over his hand. They tell you what's wrong if you listen right. Maybe that's where I learned to listen more than I spoke. Luke hated the garage. It was too quiet there. No audience, no applause. He belonged in living rooms filled with people, retelling the same stories of his wins with new exaggeration. My mother would top off everyone's drinks and beam like she'd personally built him. When I got back from my first deployment, thinner and older in ways a mirror couldn't show, there was a dinner in my honor. At least that's what the invitation said. What it really was another stage for Luke. He raised his glass, grinning, tie loosened. To my little sister, he said, finally back from counting boxes for Uncle Sam. Everyone laughed. I smiled tightly, tasted metal in my mouth. My mother leaned toward a neighbor and whispered, not quietly enough, it's all classified, apparently. Office work, you know how they dress it up. I didn't correct her. I watched my father instead. He sat at the end of the table, fingers drumming softly on the wood. When the laughter died down, he cleared his throat. Proud of you, Han, he said simply. No speech, no story. Just that. It was the only thing that kept me from walking out. The thing about being the quiet one is this: nobody notices what you see. I watched Luke borrow money from my father and never pay it back. I watched my mother hide overdue bill notices in the drawer under the phone. I watched the way my father's shoulders tensed when Luke talked about investors and fast opportunity. Part of me knew something was wrong, but I was always shipping out again. Another base, another desert, another night under buzzing fluorescent lights staring at maps that couldn't exist. There was always a war somewhere else to fight. I didn't know the last battle would be in a probate court, with my own family sitting on the wrong side. After the funeral, the house felt wrong. Too quiet, but not in the peaceful way my father liked. This was the quiet of something waiting. People came and went with casseroles and condolences. The hallway smelled like perfume, cologne, and grief that was already turning into gossip. I stayed mostly in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, listening. Luke held court in the living room, shaking hands, telling everyone about his expanding, contracting business. He used the same pitch on me once, waving around glossy brochures with phrases like veteran, adjacent experience, and defense, friendly solution. I'd told him no. He'd laughed and said, "Relax, Hannah. Not everything's a conspiracy." That night, in the swirl of mourners, I saw him pull my father's lawyer aside. Mr. Bell, old, careful man, glasses always sliding down his nose. They stepped near the hallway, not quite out of view, but just far enough away that Luke probably thought he couldn't be heard. He forgot who taught me to listen. "Look, I just want to be sure everything is fair," Luke murmured. Dad knew Hannah embellish it. You know how she is with her story. I went cold. I didn't move. Belle frowned. "Your father's will is clear, Luke. Equal split." And that note, Luke's voice sharpened. That line about her service to the country, that doesn't mean anything legal, right? Belle's answer was too soft to catch. Luke's was, "She works at a warehouse for God's sake," he said. "She sits behind a desk. My friends serve. She just plays dress up every few years." I felt the counter dig into my spine. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I didn't answer. I just listened. Later, when the last car pulled away and my mother finally stopped crying long enough to start rearranging things, I went to the garage. It felt emptier without my father's presence. The air was still, tools hung in exact order, untouched. His coffee mug sat on the workbench, a cold ring at the bottom. In the corner under the old license plates, there used to be a small metal box. Green, dented, locked with a simple key. He'd never let anyone touch it. Old service stuff, he'd told me once, and some things that don't belong to this house. That box was gone. I stood in the space where it should have been, stomach tight. Maybe my mother had moved it. Maybe. 2 weeks later, An official envelope arrived at my small apartment in Virginia. Heavy paper, court seal. Notice of will contest, the heading read. I sat down on the couch slowly, the cheap fabric rough against my palm. My brother's name was all over it. Luke Cole, plaintiff. He wasn't just questioning the distribution. He was accusing me of fraud, of lying about my service, of manipulating our father. Stolen valor. Those words again, now in black ink. By the time I reached the last page, my hands had stopped shaking. What I felt wasn't shock anymore. It was something colder, sharper. For years, I'd tried to manage my family like a fragile ceasefire. Give in here, stay quiet there, keep the peace. But this was an attack on record. This wasn't a family issue anymore. It was an operation. And operations I knew how to handle. I found the key to the missing box in the last place my father would have expected my mother to look. Taped beneath the drawer where he kept the takeout menus and random screws, right next to the old phone. It was a tiny thing, dull silver, worn smooth at the edges. I drove back down to North Carolina on a gray morning, rain streaking the windshield, the highway buzzing under my tires. My mother thought I was coming to talk sense into myself. I didn't correct her. I asked to go to the garage alone. Don't be long, she said, arms folded. Your brother's already upset enough about this whole misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Right. I stepped into the garage and closed the door behind me. The quiet wrapped around me like an old coat. The box wasn't there, but the outline where it had sat for years was still printed in dust on the shelf. My father was a simple man in some ways. In other ways, he was more like me than anyone knew. I ran my fingers along the wall, feeling for irregularity. The paneling had always looked uneven near the back corner. When I pressed on a slightly bowed plank, it shifted. Behind it, in a hollow space, sat the green metal box. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The key turned in the lock with a soft click. Inside were three things: a folded American flag patch, a small notebook, and a thick envelope with my name on it. The envelope felt heavy, not with weight, but with history. I opened it with careful fingers. Inside were photocopies, email, a few printed bank statements, a letter on letterhead I recognized but had never seen in my father's hand, a regional office of a federal agency that wasn't supposed to know my name. My father's handwriting ran along the margin in his uneven scrawl. Talk to Hannah's contact. Luke's contracts don't smell right. If something happens to me, she'll know who to call. My heart pounded. I flipped open the notebook. Dates, amounts, names of companies Luke had mentioned at dinners, written next to notes like shady rep and pushing dad to sign consulting deals. There was a line near the end, written just a few weeks before my father died. He keeps using her service as advertising. My sister served, we understand, vets. If he knew half of what she really did, he'd keep her name out of his mouth. Told him no more. He didn't like that. I sat down hard on the work stool. This wasn't just about the money. This wasn't even just about pride. Luke had been using my service, the one I couldn't talk about, like a prop, a story, a brand. And when our father tried to put a stop to it, added that single line in the will acknowledging my unseen service. Luke hadn't just been offended. He'd been threatened. Because if anyone ever dug into what I'd really done, they might start digging into who he'd been talking to. There was one more thing at the bottom of the envelope. A business card with only a name and a number. No agency, no title. If it ever gets bad, my father had written on the back, call her. Tell her you're my daughter, she'll know. The name on the card made my stomach lurch. I hadn't seen it in years. Major Elise Park, the JAG officer who'd once told me, if your past ever follows you home, call me before it catches up. My fingers hovered over my phone. Part of me wanted to walk away, burn the papers, pretend I'd never seen them. But I could feel my brother's words from the court notice crawling under my skin. Liar, thief, stolen valor. So I dialed the number. It rang once, twice, then a familiar, steady voice answered. Park. I closed my eyes for a second, drawing in a breath that tasted like oil and dust and old ghosts. Elise, I said, it's Hannah Cole. There was a tiny pause on the line. I was wondering when you'd call, she replied. Section 6, investigation. The first thing Major, now attorney, Elise Park did was switch to a secure line. Old habits die hard. The second thing she did was listen. Really listen. I sat at my small kitchen table in Virginia, blinds half closed, the glow of my laptop screen painting everything in cold blue. It was past midnight. The hallway light buzzed overhead. I told her about the will, the clause about my unseen service, Luke's accusations, the missing box, my father's notes. I didn't tell her details about my deployment. I didn't have to. She'd seen enough cases like mine to read between the lines. When I finished, there was a long silence. I almost filled it with nervous words. Instead, I remembered my father. Engines don't lie. Let them talk first. Finally, Elise exhaled. Okay, she said. Two things are happening at once. One, your brother is contesting the will on the grounds that you lied about federal service. Two, your deceased father documented concerns that your brother is misusing veteran status and possibly engaging in fraud. That about sums it up, I said, voice flat. Good news and bad news, she continued. Bad news, because of the nature of your service, we can't just walk into court with your file. Most of it doesn't exist on paper, not in a way you can show. And the good news, there's a protocol, she said. Obscure, almost never used, but it exists for exactly this kind of mess. She explained it slowly, like she was unpacking something fragile. A classified verification letter, not from the local VA, not from a branch office, but from a centralized, interagency review board. It wouldn't list operations or units. It wouldn't even say what I'd done. It would only say this, that I had, in fact, served in a capacity that the court was legally obligated not to question further. In other words, Elise said, if the judge accepts it, your brother's accusations become extremely risky for him. How risky? I asked. Well, she said, making false statements on a federal record about a protected government employee can look a lot like trying to expose classified status, the kind of thing that makes certain people take an interest. I stared at the grain of the table, the small scratches from years of coffee mugs and late night meal. I don't want him hurt, I said quietly. It surprised me, hearing myself say it. Elise was quiet for a beat. This isn't about hurting him, she replied. It's about protecting you and honoring your father's wishes. We spent the next weeks building the case. Emails between my father and regional officials. Notes from his notebook, scanned and encrypted. A statement from one of my old commanding officers that said exactly nothing and everything. I watched documents upload in the dark, progress bars crawling across my screen. I highlighted dates, circled names, mapped the pattern of my brother's business on a legal pad like it was a supply route in hostile territory. At work, I moved boxes on spreadsheets and smiled at small talk. At home, I moved ghosts across pages and prepared for war. Finally, one rainy Thursday, a courier knocked on my apartment door. He handed me a flat envelope. No return address. Thick paper. The seal on the back wasn't one I saw often outside of a very specific building. I signed for it, fingers suddenly clumsy. When I called Elise, she didn't say hello. It's there, she asked. It's here, I said. Don't open it, she instructed. Bring it straight to your probate attorney. He'll submit it under seal the morning of the hearing. Once the judge reads it, the room changes. What does it actually say? I asked. She hesitated. Enough, she answered. Enough to make sure the court understands exactly who they're dealing with. I held the envelope in both hands. It felt heavier than it should. This is a one-time shot, Hannah, she added softly. Once that letter is read, your brother's life won't look the same. Your family's story won't look the same. I thought of my father's handwriting. If it ever gets bad, call her. It's already not the same, I said. We set the hearing date. Motions were filed. My brother's lawyers grew more aggressive, sending questions dripping with sarcasm about alleged deployment. I answered none of them directly. I didn't have to. We had our own weapon now. All that was left was one more piece I didn't know we were missing. My father had left behind more than notebooks and bank statements. He'd left a voice, and I was about to hear it. I found the recording by accident. 2 nights before the hearing, I drove down to the house again. The road stretched out in front of me, black and empty. My headlights cut a tunnel through the dark. My mother answered the door in her robe, eyes puffy. Are you here to apologize? She asked, before I was even fully on the porch. For what? I asked. For putting your brother through this circus, she snapped. He's the only one who's been there for this family. Your father would be horrified. I bit back the words in my throat. My father left his wishes in writing, I said instead. The court will honor that. She scoffed. If you think judges care more about your little office job than Luke's business experience. I need to get something from the garage. I cut in, my voice steady. Then I'll go. She glared but stepped aside. The garage was cooler than the warm, stale house. The faint smell of oil and rain mixed in the air. I stood in the middle of the concrete floor and just listened for a moment. It was stupid, but part of me expected my father's heavy footsteps, the scrape of his boots, the clink of a wrench. Instead, there was only the hum of the old fridge in the corner. I went to his workbench. Drawers, jars, the radio with the broken dial. Under a stack of stained rags, something small and plastic winked in the dim light. A cheap digital voice recorder. I turned it over in my hand. On the side, in flaking black marker, my father had written one word. Approve. My mouth went dry, so I didn't play it there. I took it back to my car, sat behind the wheel with the doors shut. The world narrowed to the little rectangle of glowing screen. There were only two audio files. I pressed play on the first, static, then my father's voice, rough and a little tired. Luke, I don't want to talk business today, he said. Your sister's coming by on leave. I want a normal dinner. My brother's laugh filled the car, louder than I expected. Dad, relax, he said. I just need your signature on a couple things. It helps if we can pitch the company as family, veteran connected. Clients love that. There you go again, my father muttered. Using Hannah's service like some sales pitch. She'd hate it. Silence, then Luke's voice sharper. She doesn't even have real service, Dad. She pushes papers. You've heard her. I can't talk about it. That's not combat, that's customer service. I've got guys who actually serve. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. She signed the same dotted line you did, my father said, anger creeping in. You think the nightmares are fake. Luke snorted. She has nightmares because she likes to be the center of attention, he said. But fine, keep worshiping your ghost soldier while I actually bring in money. Chairs scraped. My father's voice dropped, the way it always did when he was done joking. I'm changing the will, son, he said. Equal shares, and I'm putting a line in there for Hannah's service. Your name's not the only one that matters in this family. The air in the recording went still. When Luke spoke again, the charm was gone. You do that, he said quietly, and I'll contest. You can't build a business on fake stories, Dad. Not even for your favorite little mystery girl. If you drag your sister through court over this, my father replied, you won't like the people who show up to defend her. The file ended with the click of the recorder being shut off. My throat burned. I played the second file. It was shorter. My father again, this time alone. If you're hearing this, Han, he said, voice softer, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you face to face. The breath. I don't know what you did out there. I don't need to. I just know you came back different. And not because of an office chair. I swallowed hard. I put that line in the will because you deserved at least one sentence in this world that says I saw you, he continued. If your brother makes trouble, show them this. And call the number I gave you. Remember, engines don't lie. People do. There was a rough chuckle. Don't let them make you small, kiddo. The recording clicked off. I sat there in the dark car, tears sliding down my face silently. He'd known more than I thought. He'd believed me without needing proof. My brother, on the other hand, had used my silence as a weapon, my service as decoration, my father's love as something to bargain against. I wiped my cheeks, took a steadying breath, and transferred both files to my phone. Then I emailed them to Elise with a single sentence. If the judge needs to understand motive, play these. I didn't know it yet, but those recordings, they were going to tear my brother's mask off in front of everyone he thought he controlled. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse smelled like old paper, wet umbrellas, and nerve. I wore a simple dark dress and the only pair of heels I owned. No uniform, no ribbon, nothing my brother could turn into a joke. Luke arrived in a tailored navy suit, laughing too loud with his legal team. My mother walked beside him, avoiding my eyes. Inside the probate courtroom, the wood pews creaked as people settled. A few curious locals had shown up. Word travels fast in small towns when there's drama. The judge, an older man with silver hair and a face like carved stone, glanced over the file in front of him. We're here regarding the estate of Thomas Cole, he began. Specifically, the contest by the plaintiff, Luke Cole, concerning a clause referencing the defendant's service to the country. Luke's attorney stood first, painting a picture with careful, insinuating word. While we honor all who serve, Your Honor, he said, oozing false respect. In this case, the defendant has no documentation of service beyond basic civilian employment. There are no discharge papers, no VA benefits, no visible record. Yet Mr. Cole's late father was led to believe. Mason, my attorney, let him talk. We de-expected this. Finally, the judge turned to Luke. Mr. Cole, you've asked to address the court directly, he said. You may proceed. Luke took the stand like it was a stage. He adjusted the microphone, gave the room a practiced, sorrowful smile. My sister is imaginative, he began. We all loved it when she said she was doing her part. but the truth is, she's always worked in office. Meanwhile, I've been the one supporting this family, building a real business. It hurt to see my father misled in his final year. His eyes glistened. I knew that trick. She talks about deployments, he continued, adding air quotes I felt in my gut. But she can't show a single paper. It's all classified. Honestly, Your Honor, it feels like she used our father's respect for the military to steal from his estate. The word hung in the air, steal. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, Mr. Cole. You may step down. Luke glanced at me as he walked past, a tiny victorious smirk flickering across his face. That was his last comfortable moment. Counsel for the defense, the judge said. Mason rose, calm, precise. Your Honor, we do not intend to argue a motion, he said. We have two pieces of evidence for the court's consideration, one under seal, one more personal. He handed the thick, wax-sealed envelope to the bailiff. The first is a verification letter from an interagency review board. It can only be read in camera, under specific statutory authority. The judge's brows knit. He examined the seal. Something in his expression shifted. This court will take a brief recess, he said tersely. Counsel approached. Everyone else remained seated. He disappeared into chambers with the letter, a clerk trailing behind. The room buzzed, whispers rising. Luke's lawyer frowned, clearly unnerved. I stared at the empty bench, heart thudding. I'd stepped into briefing rooms before dangerous mission that felt less tense than that 20-minute recess. When the judge returned, the change in him was visible. His posture was straighter, his expression tighter. There was a new edge in his eyes as he looked over the courtroom. Let the record reflect, he said slowly, that the document reviewed by this court confirms the defendant's service in a capacity protected by federal law and classified under multiple statutes. He looked directly at Luke. It further indicates that any attempt to publicly question or expose details of that service may carry legal consequences well beyond the scope of this probate hearing. The whispers died instantly. Luke's face went pale. His lawyer swallowed hard. Officers, the judge said, voice suddenly sharp, seal this courtroom, effective immediately. The heavy doors closed with a thunderous thud. Locks slid into place. My mother gasped. The judge turned to the court reporter. For the next portion, we are off the record, he said. Stenography is suspended. Then his gaze landed on my brother. Mr. Cole, he said, voice cold, you have just sworn under oath that your sister fabricated federal service. I am now in possession of classified documentation that states the opposite and warns of the sensitivity of her role. Luke opened his mouth. Do not speak, the judge snapped. A U.S. Marshal will be interviewing you after this hearing regarding your statements today, as well as your use of your sister's presumed service in your business dealing. Luke's mouth closed with a tiny click. My mother reached for his arm with shaking hand. The judge looked back at Mason. You said there was a second piece of evidence. Yes, Your Honor, Mason replied. With the court's permission, a short audio recording. It speaks to motive. The judge hesitated, then nodded. Proceed. Mason pressed play. My father's tired voice filled the courtroom. Luke's sharper one followed. They listened to my brother dismiss my fake service, brag about using my story in his marketing, threaten to contest the will. They heard my father warn him about the people who would show up if he dragged me into court. When the second file played, my father speaking directly to me from beyond the grave, there were quiet sobs from the back row. Not from my mother, from people who'd known him at the shop. When it ended, the silence was thick. The judge folded his hands. This court finds, he said carefully, that the decedent's will is valid as written. The equal division stands. The clause acknowledging Ms. Cole's service will remain. In fact, if I could underline it, I would. There was a faint ripple of shocked laughter. He didn't smile. As for you, Mr. Cole, he continued, you have opened a door today that cannot be closed. You will cooperate fully with any federal inquiry into your use of military service as a marketing tool, and you will refrain from speaking another word about your sister's record under penalty of contempt. He turned to me then. Ms. Cole, he said, voice softer, this court thanks you for your service, whatever form it took. I regret that it required a classified letter for your own family to see you. I nodded once. My throat was too tight to answer. The hearing adjourned. The doors were unsealed, and as we stepped into the hallway, two marshals moved toward Luke. Mr. Cole, one said, we need a word. They didn't cuff him. They didn't have to. The look on his face said enough. 6 months later, the courthouse felt like a different planet. I wasn't there for a hearing this time. I was just walking past on my way to meet Mason for coffee. The sun was bright, bouncing off the stone steps. The estate had finally settled. Half of my father's savings and the proceeds from the sale of the house sat quietly in an account with my name on. I hadn't touched most of it. Money wasn't what this had been about. Luke's contracting business didn't survive the federal attention. There were no perp walks or dramatic raids, just audits. Question: contracts quietly withdrawn once agencies looked a little closer at his veteran, connected branding, and the inconsistencies in his paperwork. Last I heard, he'd sold his car and moved into a small apartment 3 towns over. My mother went with. She texted me once, "You've ruined your brother. I hope you're happy." I stared at the message for a long time. Then, a week later, I got another one. "They're still investigating him. You work for the government. Fix this. It's the least you can do after everything he did for you." I read that one twice. I didn't feel the old urge to explain, to defend, to make myself smaller so she'd calm down. Instead, I thought about my father's voice. "Don't let them make you small, kiddo." I blocked the number. My life isn't glamorous now. There are no secret bases or night flights. My work moved into a quieter corner, training younger analysts, consulting on systems I once used in the field. One afternoon, my supervisor called me into a small, windowless conference. On the table was a simple wooden box. Inside, a medal and a paper citation. The language was vague, the details redacted even from me. "For contributions to operations critical to national security," it read. No cameras, no speech, just a handshake and a nod from people who understood what those blank spaces meant. Later, I drove out to a small veterans memorial on the edge of town. Names carved into stone, flags snapping softly in the breeze. I didn't look for my name. It wasn't there. It never will be. I sat on the low wall, hands in my pockets, and thought about legacy. My brother still believes legacy is measured in square footage and profit margin, in who gets their name on a building. My mother believes it's in who the town talks about the most. My father, he left me one sentence in a will and a voice on a recorder. He gave me something they never could: permission to exist as I am, without proof, without applause. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear Luke's words in that courtroom. "She never served." And then I remember the judge's face when he read that letter, the way his voice changed, the way the doors locked. I remember the look in Luke's eyes when the marshals approached, not anger, not even humiliation, just the dawning, terrifying realization that the world didn't revolve around him, that there were rooms, decisions, and truths he'd never be allowed to touch. For years, my family treated my life like a rumor. Now, they live with the knowledge that the rumor was bigger, darker, and more real than they ever imagined. I don't need their apology anymore. I don't need their belief. Every time I swipe my ID at a secure door, every time a young analyst sits across from me and trusts my judgment, every time a quiet email comes with a simple "thanks for the assist" from a place I'll never visit again. That's my proof. In the end, I didn't win because a judge thanked me. I didn't win because my brother lost his contracts. I won the moment I stopped asking people who lived small lives for permission to have a big, invisible one. And that's the part of the story my brother will never understand. If you listened all the way to the end, thank you. Some stories don't come with public medals or happy family photos. Some victories are quiet, a locked courtroom, a single sentence in a will, a choice to walk away. If you've ever had to defend your worth against your own family's doubts, I see you. Tell me in the comments. Backhand index pointing right. Where are you listening from? Country/city. Backhand index pointing right. Have you ever been underestimated by the people closest to you? If you felt this story, please like the video. Memo, share your experience below. Your words might help someone else. Bell, subscribe to the channel for more dark emotional stories about betrayal, justice, and quiet revenge. Thanks for listening. You're not as invisible as they made you feel.